My fiancé called off our wedding after his sister created fake affair evidence using his best friend as an accomplice because she was jealous of our happy relationship while going through her own divorce. Then 3 years later his best friend confessed the truth. I am Laura, 29F, and this whole thing started when I was 24. I worked at a marketing firm in downtown Tacoma. The office had about 40 people spread across 3 floors. I met Derek, 25M, during my second week there. He worked in the digital campaigns department and I was in client relations. The company held monthly mixers in the break room on the 5th floor. Derek showed up to the September mixer wearing a Seahawks jersey even though it was a Friday and everyone else wore business casual. He made a joke about the coffee machine being older than both of us combined. I laughed because it was true. The thing made noises like it was trying to communicate with another dimension. We started having lunch together in October. There was a sandwich shop 2 blocks away that sold these massive Italian subs. Derek always ordered the same thing and so did I. We'd sit at the metal tables outside even when it got cold. He talked about hiking trails around Mount Rainier. I told him about the time I got lost on the Wonderland Trail and had to follow a family of 4 back to the parking lot. His sister Christine, 32F, worked at a law office across town. Derek mentioned her during our 3rd or 4th lunch. She had helped him move to Tacoma after college. Their parents lived in Spokane. Christine called him every Sunday morning without fail. He said she checked in on him because she worried he'd forget to eat real meals or pay his electric bill on time. We started dating in November. Derek took me to a Thai restaurant near Pike Place Market. The place had Christmas lights strung up year-round and the owner's cat slept on the radiator by the window. We ordered too much food and took the leftovers home in styrofoam containers that leaked red curry all over my car seats. I met Christine in December at a holiday party Derek's office threw. She wore a gray pantsuit and kept her hair in a tight bun. She asked me questions about my job and my family for 20 minutes straight. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? Did I have siblings? How long had I lived in Tacoma? Derek stood next to us holding 2 plastic cups of wine and jumping in whenever there was a pause. After the party Derek said Christine liked me. She had texted him saying I seemed nice and competent. I asked what competent meant in this context. He said Christine used that word for everyone she approved of. We moved in together when I was 26. Derek found a 2-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill with hardwood floors and windows that actually opened all the way. The landlord let us paint the living room whatever color we wanted, so we picked a light blue that looked different depending on the time of day. We bought a couch from someone on Craigslist who was moving to Portland. The couch was brown leather and had a cigarette burn on one of the armrests, but it was comfortable. Christine came over to see the apartment 3 days after we finished unpacking. She walked through each room and opened the cabinets in the kitchen. She asked if we had renter's insurance. Derek said we were working on it. She told him to get it by the end of the week and texted him the name of her insurance agent. Derek's friend Nathan, 26M, also worked at the marketing firm. He lived in Fremont with 2 roommates and a dog that barked whenever someone walked past their front door. Nathan came over for dinner once a month. He always brought beer and stayed until midnight talking about bands I'd never heard of. Christine called Derek every Sunday at 9 in the morning. I could hear her voice through the phone asking about his week. Did he get the promotion he applied for? Was he eating vegetables? Had he checked his tire pressure? Derek answered every question while making breakfast. Eggs and toast. Sometimes pancakes if we had the ingredients. Derek proposed when I was 27. We drove to the San Juan Islands for a long weekend. We stayed at a bed and breakfast that overlooked the water. The room had a fireplace that didn't work and a clawfoot bathtub. Derek proposed on Saturday morning while we were walking on the beach. He got down on one knee in the sand and pulled out a ring box from his jacket pocket. The ring was silver with a small diamond. I said yes and we went back to the room. We called our families that afternoon. My mom cried on the phone. My dad asked when the wedding would be. Derek called his parents first and then Christine. She answered on the second ring. Derek told her the news. There was a pause. She said congratulations and asked if I was there. Derek handed me the phone. Christine said she was happy for us and that we should celebrate. Her voice sounded flat. After we hung up, Derek said Christine was probably just surprised. We set the wedding date for October when I would be 28. We picked a venue in Woodinville that had a barn and a field. The deposit was $2,000. We mailed save the dates in March. Light blue cards with our names and the date printed in gold letters. We ordered invitations in May. Cream-colored paper with matching envelopes. Christine offered to help with the planning. She sent Derek spreadsheets about catering options and links to florist websites. She called me twice to ask about the guest list and the seating chart. The second time she called, she spent 30 minutes explaining why we should have assigned seating instead of letting people choose their own tables. Nathan was going to be Derek's best man. He took Derek to Portland for his bachelor party in August. They went to breweries and stayed at a hotel downtown. Nathan posted photos on social media of them at some bar with a pool table. Around the same time, Derek started coming home later from work. He said his team was behind on a campaign for a new client. He'd walk in at 8 or 9 at night and go straight to the kitchen to make a sandwich. Then he'd sit on the couch with his laptop and work for another hour. In early September, Derek started sleeping in the second bedroom. He said I'd been tossing and turning at night and he needed better rest because of work stress. The second bedroom had a futon and a desk we never used. He took his pillow and one of the blankets from our bed. I asked him if something was wrong. He said work was overwhelming and he needed space. I asked if it was about the wedding. He said no. He stopped touching me. No hugs when he got home. No hand-holding when we watched TV. When I tried to sit close to him on the couch, he'd shift away after a few minutes and say he was going to get water. 2 weeks before the wedding, Derek came home at 10 at night. He walked into the living room where I was reading. He stood in the doorway with his keys still in his hand. He said he couldn't do this anymore. I asked him what he meant. He said he was going to stay at Christine's house for a while. He needed to think. I asked him to explain what was happening. He told me to stop acting like I didn't know. Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him. He didn't answer my calls or texts for 3 days. On the 4th day he sent a message saying we needed to talk in person. We met at a coffee shop near his office. He sat across from me with his hands flat on the table. He said he knew about me and Nathan. I asked him what he was talking about. He said Nathan had told him everything. That Nathan and I had been seeing each other behind his back. That it had been going on for months. That Nathan felt guilty and confessed. I told him that wasn't true. I'd never done anything with Nathan. Derek pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots of text messages. The messages were between a number saved as my name and a number saved as Nathan. The texts talked about meeting up when Derek wasn't home. About keeping things secret. The timestamps went back to July. I told him I never sent those messages. Someone had faked them. Derek said Nathan had the same texts on his phone. Nathan had shown them to Christine first because he didn't know how to tell Derek. Christine told Derek he needed to see the proof before confronting me. Derek called off the wedding the next day. We had to contact all the vendors and cancel everything. The venue kept the deposit. The caterer refunded half of what we paid. I moved out of the apartment 2 weeks later. Derek kept the lease. I stayed with my parents in Tacoma for a month before finding a studio in Belltown. People we both knew stopped talking to me. Mutual friends from work didn't respond to my messages. Someone from the marketing firm told me there were rumors about what happened. That I'd cheated on Derek with his best friend right before the wedding. Nathan moved to San Francisco 3 months later for a new job. He blocked me on social media before he left. I kept working at the marketing firm until December, then quit and found a job at a different company. Starting over felt like the only option. Update 1: Derek's mom called me yesterday. I didn't recognize the number at first because I deleted all their contact information. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message asking me to call her back. She said it was important. I called her back this morning. She asked if I had time to talk. I said yes. She told me Nathan had sent an email to Derek last week. In the email, Nathan said he needed to confess something. That he'd lied about the affair. That there had never been anything between him and me. Nathan wrote that Christine had approached him in June. She told him Derek was making a mistake marrying me. That I wasn't right for their family. She said Derek wouldn't listen to her concerns, so she needed Nathan's help. She asked Nathan to go along with a story about an affair. She'd create fake text messages and Nathan would confirm them when Derek asked. Nathan agreed because Christine convinced him it was for Derek's best interest. She said I'd trapped Derek into proposing and that Derek was too loyal to break things off on his own. Nathan wrote in the email that he regretted it immediately after, but Christine told him it was too late to back out. That changing his story would make things worse. Nathan moved to San Francisco to get away from the situation. He said the guilt had been eating at him. He was writing the email now because he'd started seeing someone new and couldn't move forward without clearing his conscience. Derek's mom said Derek called her after reading the email. She said Derek had also called Christine. Christine admitted what she'd done. She said she did it because she thought I wasn't good enough for Derek. That I would have held him back. Christine's husband had filed for divorce a month before she approached Nathan. She didn't tell anyone in the family about her marriage falling apart until after Derek canceled our wedding. Derek's mom asked if I would be willing to meet with their family. She said Derek wanted to apologize in person. Christine wanted to explain herself. I told her I needed time to think about it. She said to take all the time I needed and gave me her number to call back. I talked to my mom about it last night. She said I didn't owe them anything but that hearing them out might give me closure. My dad said I should tell them all to leave me alone. I decided to meet them. Derek's mom gave me the address of her sister's house in Bellevue. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon. I drove there and parked on the street. The house was a 2-story colonial with a brick pathway leading to the front door. Derek's mom answered the door. She looked older than I remembered. She led me to the dining room where Derek and Christine were already sitting at the table. Derek's mom sat down and gestured for me to take the empty chair. Christine started talking first. She said she was sorry for what she'd done. That her marriage had been falling apart and she wasn't thinking clearly. That she'd projected her own failing relationship onto mine and Derek's. She said she realized now that she'd destroyed something good because she couldn't handle her own life. Derek sat with his hands in his lap. He said he was sorry for not believing me. That he should have trusted me instead of accepting what Nathan and Christine told him. He said he'd spent the last 3 months replaying everything and wondering if he'd made a mistake. When he got Nathan's email, it confirmed what he'd been afraid of. Derek's mom said she was sorry for not reaching out sooner. That she'd believed Christine's version of events because Christine was family. I sat there listening to all of it. 3 months ago these people had cut me out of their lives based on a lie. Now they wanted me to understand their reasons and forgive them. I told them I heard what they said. I stood up and left. Derek followed me outside. He asked if we could talk more. I got in my car and drove home. Update 2: Derek has been texting me every few days since the meeting in Bellevue. He asks how I'm doing. He sends articles he thinks I'd find interesting. He apologizes again for what happened. I haven't responded to any of the messages. Last Tuesday he showed up at the coffee shop near my apartment. I go there most mornings before work. He was sitting at a table by the window when I walked in. He stood up when he saw me and asked if he could buy me coffee. I told him I was just getting something to go. He said he'd only take 5 minutes. I sat down. He ordered my usual drink without asking what I wanted. When he came back to the table he pushed the cup toward me and started talking. He said he'd been thinking about us constantly. That he'd realized how much he threw away. He said he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but he had to try. He wanted another chance. He said he still loved me. I picked up the coffee and left. That night I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Part of me wanted to believe him. We'd spent 3 years together. We'd planned a whole life. But then I thought about how quickly he'd turned on me. How he'd shown me those fake texts and looked at me like I was a stranger. How he'd let Christine manipulate both of us. I called my mom. She asked what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know. She said I should trust my gut. The next morning Derek texted me again. He said he knew I needed space but asked if I'd consider meeting him one more time. That he wanted to explain everything he'd worked through over the past few months. I told him I'd think about it. Christine called me on Friday. I almost didn't answer. She said she wanted to talk without anyone else around. She asked if we could meet for lunch. I asked her why. She said she owed me a real apology. One that wasn't performed in front of Derek and their mom. We met at a sandwich shop in Fremont on Saturday. The place was half empty. Christine looked different. Her hair was down and she wasn't wearing a suit. She had dark circles under her eyes. She told me her ex-husband had been cheating on her for over a year before she found out. She'd suspected something was wrong but convinced herself she was being paranoid. When she finally got proof, it broke something in her. She said seeing Derek happy with me made her angry. She wanted him to feel what she was feeling. So she destroyed his relationship the same way hers had been destroyed. She said she knew it wasn't fair to me. That I'd done nothing wrong. She said she'd told Derek everything after Nathan's email arrived. That she'd explained how she'd manipulated the situation. Derek had stopped speaking to her. Their mom had told her she needed professional help. Christine said she'd started seeing someone who was helping her work through what she'd done. I asked her if she expected me to forgive her. She said no. She said she just wanted me to know the truth. That what she'd done wasn't about me at all. After lunch I went home and sat on my couch for an hour staring at the wall. Derek texted me that evening asking if we could have dinner sometime this week. I told him okay. Update 3: Derek and I had dinner on Wednesday. We went to the Thai place near Pike Place Market where we'd had our first date. The same Christmas lights were still hanging. The owner's cat wasn't there anymore. Derek said it had died last year. We ordered the same dishes we used to get. Derek talked for most of the meal. He said he'd spent the last few months thinking about what went wrong. He said he'd been weak for believing Christine without questioning her. That he'd let his sister control his life for too long. He said he'd been working on setting boundaries with his family. He reached across the table and put his hand on mine. He said he wanted to try again. That we could start slow. That he'd do whatever it took to rebuild my trust. I pulled my hand back. I told him what he was asking wasn't possible. That the person he'd been with 3 years ago didn't exist anymore. That I'd spent the last few months building a life that didn't include him or his family or the version of myself that would have married him. Derek said he understood I was angry but that people could work through things like this. That couples came back from worse. I told him the problem wasn't that he'd made a mistake. The problem was that when things got difficult he'd chosen to believe I'd betrayed him. He'd picked his sister's word over mine without hesitation. That wasn't love. That was convenience. He started to argue but I interrupted him. I said there was nothing left to discuss. I paid for my half of the meal and left. Derek sent me a long message the next day. He said he respected my decision but hoped I'd change my mind eventually. That he'd always care about me. I blocked his number after reading it. Christine texted me on Friday. She said she heard Derek and I had talked. She said she hoped I wasn't letting what she'd done keep me from being happy. I deleted the message and blocked her too. My mom asked me last night if I was okay with how things ended. I told her I was. She said I seemed lighter. My dad said I should have told Derek off years ago. I'm still working at the same company. I moved to a bigger apartment in Queen last month. One bedroom with a view of the Space Needle. The walls are white and I haven't decided what color to paint them yet. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks away that makes better lattes than my old place. I go there on Saturday mornings and read the newspaper like someone twice my age. Sometimes I think about the life I almost had. The wedding that didn't happen. The apartment in Capitol Hill with the blue walls. The Sunday morning calls from Christine that would have continued until one of us died. I don't miss any of it. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. My brother chose his controlling fiancé over our family and excluded my stepdad and stepsister from his wedding. I dropped out as best man in protest. 3 months later, they're divorced and I'm being blamed for everything. I'm Daniel, 26M, and I need to write this down because my phone hasn't stopped ringing for 3 days. My older brother Ronald, 31M, got married last weekend and somehow I'm being blamed for ruining everything even though I wasn't even there. Let me start from the beginning because this mess goes way back. My parents got divorced when I was 7 and Ronald was 12. Our dad Michael, 54M, moved out and our mom Sandra, 52F, got remarried to my stepdad Gary, 55M, 2 years later. Gary brought his daughter Emma, 30F, into our family. The divorce was messy. Dad left because he said mom was controlling and made his life miserable. Mom said dad was selfish and never helped with anything. They fought constantly before and after the divorce. Ronald took dad's side and I took mom's side. This created a divide between us that never really healed. When Gary and Emma moved in, things got complicated. Emma was 15 and didn't want a new family. She made it clear she thought mom was trying to replace her real mom who had died 3 years earlier. Gary tried to be a good stepdad but Emma would throw tantrums whenever he disciplined her. Mom would get frustrated and tell Gary to handle his own daughter. Ronald hated the new arrangement. He was angry that mom remarried so quickly and that Gary was trying to act like our dad. He would pick fights with Gary and Emma constantly. When Ronald turned 16, he asked to live with dad full time. Mom agreed because she was tired of the fighting. After Ronald moved out, things got better for a while. Emma and I started getting along. She helped me with homework and we watched movies together. Gary taught me how to fix cars and took me to baseball games. Mom seemed happier too. But Ronald would visit every other weekend and the tension would start again. When I was in high school, Ronald started dating his now wife Stephanie, 29F. She seemed nice at first but I noticed she would make comments about our family setup. She would ask why mom remarried so fast and whether Gary was trying to replace our real dad. Ronald would agree with her and they would both make jokes about our blended family. During my senior year, Ronald and Stephanie got engaged. The wedding planning started and that's when things got really bad. Stephanie had opinions about everything. She didn't want Emma in the wedding party because Emma wasn't Ronald's real sister. She said the seating chart was complicated because of all the step relationships. She complained that having 2 sets of parents would make the ceremony confusing. Mom tried to be supportive but I could see she was hurt by Stephanie's comments. Gary didn't say much but he stopped coming to wedding planning meetings. Emma just avoided everything related to the wedding. I tried to stay neutral but it was hard when Stephanie would make snide remarks about our family every time I saw her. The worst part was how Ronald acted during all this. He would agree with Stephanie and even add his own comments. He said our family was weird and complicated. He told people that Gary wasn't really his stepdad and Emma wasn't really his sister. He made it sound like our family was some kind of mistake. 6 months before the wedding, Ronald asked me to be his best man. I was surprised because we weren't that close anymore. When I asked why he chose me, he said it was because I was his real brother and he wanted his real family at his wedding. The way he said it made me uncomfortable but I agreed anyway. Being best man was a nightmare. Ronald and Stephanie had opinions about everything I did. They didn't like the bachelor party I planned because it wasn't fancy enough. They criticized the speech I wrote because it mentioned our blended family. They wanted me to rewrite it to focus only on Ronald and me growing up together before the divorce. The speech thing really bothered me. They wanted me to pretend that the last 15 years didn't happen. They wanted me to act like Gary and Emma weren't important parts of our family. I rewrote the speech 3 times but they were never happy with it. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ronald called me and said Stephanie had been thinking about the guest list. She decided that Gary and Emma shouldn't come to the wedding. She said it would be too confusing for her family and that weddings should be about real family only. Ronald agreed with her. I told Ronald this was wrong. Gary had been my stepdad for almost 20 years. Emma was my stepsister and we were close. They were my family whether Ronald liked it or not. Ronald said I was being dramatic and that they could come to the reception but not the ceremony. Mom was devastated when she found out. She said she couldn't enjoy the wedding knowing that her husband and stepdaughter were excluded. She called Ronald and they had a huge fight. Ronald accused Mom of caring more about her new family than her real son. Mom accused Ronald of being selfish and hurtful. Gary didn't say much when Mom told him but I could see he was hurt. He had tried so hard to be a good stepdad to Ronald over the years. Emma was angry and said she didn't want to go to any part of the wedding if she wasn't welcome at the ceremony. The week before the wedding, I made a decision. I called Ronald and told him I couldn't be his best man anymore. I said if Gary and Emma weren't good enough for his ceremony, then neither was I. Ronald was furious and said I was choosing my fake family over my real brother. I told Ronald that Gary and Emma were my real family too. They had been there for me when he moved out. They had supported me through high school and college. They had never made me feel like I had to choose between families. Ronald hung up on me. Stephanie called me later that day screaming. She said I was ruining their wedding and being selfish. She said she had tried to accommodate our weird family situation, but I was making everything difficult. She said if I didn't show up as best man, then I shouldn't come to the wedding at all. I told her that was fine with me. I said I didn't want to be part of a wedding that excluded people I cared about. She called me ungrateful and hung up. Mom tried to convince me to reconsider. She said Ronald was still my brother and that I would regret missing his wedding. Dad called me too and said I was being stubborn. He said I should put family first and that Ronald needed me. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand up there and pretend that Gary and Emma didn't matter. I couldn't give a speech that ignored the family that had been there for me. I couldn't celebrate a marriage that started by excluding people I loved. So I didn't go to the wedding. I stayed home with Gary and Emma. We ordered pizza and watched movies. Gary said he was proud of me for standing up for what I believed in. Emma said she was glad I was her stepbrother. The wedding was last Saturday. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. On Sunday morning my phone started ringing. Ronald was calling me screaming about how I had ruined everything. He said it was all my fault and that I had destroyed his wedding. I had no idea what he was talking about. I wasn't even there. How could I have ruined anything? Ronald wouldn't explain. He just kept yelling that I was a terrible brother and that he never wanted to see me again. Then other family members started calling. Some were angry at me for not going to the wedding. Others were asking what really happened. Everyone seemed to think I had done something wrong, but nobody would tell me what. Yesterday my cousin Jake, 28M, finally explained what happened. Apparently during the reception, Ronald's new brother-in-law Tom, 27M, gave a speech. Tom had been asking people about me because he noticed I wasn't there. When he found out why I didn't come, he decided to say something about it. Tom's speech was supposed to be about welcoming Ronald into their family. But instead he talked about how families come in all shapes and sizes. He said real family members don't exclude each other. He said he was disappointed to learn that some family members weren't welcome at the wedding. According to Jake, Tom's speech made everyone uncomfortable. Stephanie's parents were embarrassed that their family's dirty laundry was being aired. Ronald was mortified that his new brother-in-law was criticizing him in front of everyone. Stephanie started crying and ran out of the reception. The party basically ended after that. People started leaving early. Stephanie's family was angry at Tom for ruining the mood. Ronald's friends were confused about what was happening. Mom and Dad were upset that the wedding turned into a disaster. Now everyone is angry at me even though I wasn't there and had nothing to do with Tom's speech. Ronald is saying I told Tom what to say, which is ridiculous because I've never even met the guy. Stephanie is saying I poisoned her family against her, which doesn't make any sense. Dad called me yesterday and said I need to apologize to Ronald and Stephanie. He said even if I didn't directly cause the problems, my absence led to them. He said I should have just gone to the wedding and kept my mouth shut. Mom is torn between supporting me and trying to fix things with Ronald. She agrees that excluding Gary and Emma was wrong, but she thinks I should have handled it differently. She wants me to reach out to Ronald and try to repair the relationship. I don't know what to do. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to stand up for my family. I never wanted Ronald's wedding to be ruined. But I also can't pretend that what he did was okay. Maybe I should have just gone to the wedding and stayed quiet. Maybe I should have given the speech they wanted and pretended Gary and Emma didn't exist. Maybe I should have put Ronald's happiness above my own principles. But I can't take it back now. The wedding is over and the damage is done. Ronald and Stephanie hate me. Half the family thinks I'm a troublemaker. The other half thinks I did the right thing but handled it badly. I keep thinking about what Tom said in his speech. He was right that real family members don't exclude each other. But maybe he was wrong to say it at Ronald's wedding. Maybe there's a time and place for everything and a wedding reception isn't the place for family drama. I don't know if I should try to fix things with Ronald or just accept that our relationship is over. Part of me wants to apologize just to make peace. But another part of me thinks that would be admitting I was wrong when I don't think I was. What would you do? Should I apologize for something I didn't actually do? Should I try to repair a relationship with someone who doesn't respect my family? Or should I just accept that some bridges can't be rebuilt? Update 1: It's been 3 weeks since I posted and a lot has happened. Thank you to everyone who commented and messaged me support. I wasn't expecting so many people to relate to my situation. After my post, I decided to stop answering calls from family members who wanted to blame me for the wedding disaster. I figured if they wanted to be angry at me for something I didn't do, that was their problem. I focused on work and spending time with Gary and Emma. But the calls didn't stop. Ronald called me every few days leaving long voicemails about how I had ruined his life. Stephanie would text me angry messages about how I was destroying her marriage. Dad kept calling saying I needed to fix things. Even some of my aunts and uncles got involved. The breaking point came last Tuesday. Ronald showed up at my apartment at 9 in the morning. He looked terrible. His hair was messy, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He pushed past me when I opened the door and sat down on my couch. Ronald told me that he and Stephanie had been fighting nonstop since the wedding. She blamed him for the Tom speech disaster. She said it was his fault for having such a complicated family situation. She said if he had just invited everyone to begin with, none of this would have happened. But Ronald was still convinced that I was the real problem. He said Stephanie's brother Tom must have gotten his information from somewhere and I was the only one who knew all the details. He accused me of calling Tom before the wedding and telling him what to say. I told Ronald this was crazy. I had never spoken to Tom in my life. I didn't even know he existed until after the wedding. But Ronald wouldn't listen. He said I was lying and that I had orchestrated the whole thing to embarrass him. Then Ronald said something that really surprised me. He said Stephanie was threatening to get their marriage annulled. She said the wedding was ruined and didn't count. She said she couldn't be married to someone whose family caused so much drama. Ronald was begging me to call Stephanie and explain that I hadn't talked to Tom. He wanted me to apologize for not coming to the wedding and for causing all the problems. He said if I didn't fix things, his marriage would be over before it started. I told Ronald I wasn't going to apologize for something I didn't do. I said if his marriage was in trouble, it wasn't because of me. I said maybe he should think about why his new brother-in-law felt the need to defend excluded family members. Ronald got angry and started yelling. He said I was being selfish and that I had always been jealous of his relationship with Dad. He said I was trying to destroy his happiness because I was miserable in my own life. I told Ronald to leave my apartment. I said I was tired of being blamed for his problems and that I wasn't going to fix his marriage for him. He stormed out, but not before saying he would never forgive me if Stephanie left him. The next day, Stephanie called me. She was crying and said she was sorry for all the angry texts. She said she knew I hadn't talked to her brother Tom. She said Tom had acted on his own after talking to other wedding guests. But then Stephanie said something that really bothered me. She said she understood why I didn't come to the wedding but she wished I had handled it differently. She said if I had just talked to her privately, they could have worked something out. I asked Stephanie what she meant by working something out. She said maybe they could have invited Gary and Emma to the ceremony after all. She said she had been stressed about the wedding and maybe she had made some bad decisions. This made me angry. Stephanie was acting like excluding Gary and Emma had been a mistake instead of a deliberate choice. She was trying to rewrite history to make herself look better. But I had been there for all the conversations. I knew she had been adamant about not wanting them at the ceremony. I told Stephanie that she had months to change her mind about the guest list. I said she had plenty of opportunities to include Gary and Emma but she chose not to. I said she couldn't blame me for her decisions. Stephanie got defensive and said she had been trying to make everyone happy. She said weddings were complicated and she had been under a lot of pressure. She said she never meant to hurt anyone. But then Stephanie said something that showed her true feelings. She said she still thought it was weird that I was so close to my stepfamily. She said most people weren't that attached to their step-relatives. She said she couldn't understand why I had chosen them over my real brother. I hung up on her. I realized that Stephanie hadn't learned anything from the wedding disaster. She still thought Gary and Emma were less important than biological family. She still didn't understand why I had stood up for them. After that call, I decided to talk to Tom. I found him on social media and sent him a message. I wanted to understand why he had given that speech and whether he regretted it. Tom responded right away. He said he had been thinking about messaging me since the wedding. He said he felt bad about causing drama but he couldn't stay quiet after learning about the situation. Tom explained that he had been looking forward to meeting me at the wedding. Stephanie had told him about her new brother-in-law and he wanted to welcome me to the family. When he asked Ronald where I was, Ronald made up some excuse about me being sick. But other family members told Tom the real reason I wasn't there. They explained about Gary and Emma being excluded and about me dropping out of the wedding party. Tom said he was shocked that his sister had excluded family members from the ceremony. Tom said he had tried to talk to Stephanie about it privately but she had brushed him off. She said it was her wedding and she could invite whoever she wanted. She said step-relatives weren't real family anyway. That's when Tom decided to say something in his speech. He said he couldn't celebrate his sister's wedding knowing that she had excluded family members. He said he hoped his speech would make people think about what family really means. Tom told me he didn't regret giving the speech. He said Stephanie needed to hear that her actions were wrong. He said he was disappointed in his sister for being so cruel to people who had been nothing but kind to her. But Tom also said he felt bad about ruining the wedding reception. He said he could have handled it better. He said maybe he should have talked to Stephanie more firmly before the wedding instead of waiting until the reception. I thanked Tom for standing up for my family. I told him that Gary and Emma had been more supportive than my biological relatives. I said it meant a lot that someone had defended them. Tom said he hoped Ronald and Stephanie would learn from this experience. He said maybe they would realize that love and loyalty matter more than blood relations. But he also said he wasn't holding his breath. After talking to Tom, I felt better about the whole situation. I realized that I wasn't crazy for being upset about Gary and Emma being excluded. I realized that my actions had been reasonable and that I had nothing to apologize for. But the family drama continued. Dad called me again and said I needed to fix things with Ronald. He said Ronald was depressed and that his marriage was falling apart. He said I was the only one who could help. I told Dad that Ronald's problems weren't my responsibility. I said if his marriage was in trouble, it was because of his own choices. I said I wasn't going to fix something I didn't break. Dad got frustrated and said I was being stubborn like my mother. He said I was putting my pride above family loyalty. He said I would regret it if Ronald's marriage ended. I told Dad that I had been loyal to my family. I said Gary and Emma were my family too and that I had stood up for them. I said if Ronald couldn't accept that, then maybe we weren't as close as I thought. Dad said I was being dramatic and that I needed to grow up. He said step relatives weren't the same as real relatives and that I should prioritize my blood family. He hung up on me after I disagreed with him. Mom called me later that day. She said she had been talking to Ronald and that he was really struggling. She said Stephanie had moved back in with her parents and that they were talking about separation. Mom said she understood why I had stood up for Gary and Emma. She said she was proud of me for defending them. But she also said she was worried about Ronald and that she wanted our family to be whole again. I told Mom that I wanted to have a good relationship with Ronald too. But I said he needed to accept that Gary and Emma were important to me. I said he needed to stop treating them like they didn't matter. Mom said she would try to talk to Ronald about respecting my relationship with Gary and Emma. She said maybe they could all sit down together and work things out. She said she hoped the family could heal from this. But I'm not sure healing is possible. Ronald and Stephanie are talking about separation. Dad thinks I'm being unreasonable. Half the extended family is taking sides. The wedding was supposed to bring people together but it's torn us apart instead. I keep thinking about what Tom said in his speech. He was right that real family members don't exclude each other. But maybe some families are too broken to fix. Maybe some relationships aren't worth saving. I don't know what's going to happen with Ronald and Stephanie. I don't know if our family will ever be the same. But I know I made the right choice by standing up for Gary and Emma. They've been my family for 20 years and I'm not going to abandon them now. Update 2: It's been 2 months since my last update and everything has changed. I thought I knew what happened at Ronald's wedding but I was wrong. The truth is much worse than I imagined. Last week, Ronald's friend Jake called me. Jake had been the photographer at the wedding and he said he needed to talk to me about something important. He asked if we could meet for coffee because he didn't want to discuss it over the phone. I was curious so I agreed to meet him. Jake looked nervous when he sat down across from me at the coffee shop. He said he had been debating whether to tell me what he knew but his conscience wouldn't let him stay quiet anymore. Jake started by apologizing for not reaching out sooner. He said he had been at the wedding and knew that I was being blamed for things that weren't my fault. He said he should have spoken up earlier but he didn't want to get involved in family drama. Then Jake told me something that made my blood run cold. He said Tom's speech wasn't spontaneous like everyone thought. Tom had been planned to give a speech welcoming Ronald to the family but that's not what happened. According to Jake, Tom had been drinking heavily during the reception. He was upset about something and kept asking people about me. When Jake asked Tom what was wrong, Tom said he had just learned something terrible about his sister Stephanie. Tom told Jake that earlier that day, while getting ready for the reception, he had overheard Stephanie talking to her maid of honor Lisa. Stephanie had been complaining about the wedding and saying she wished she had done things differently. But it wasn't regret about excluding Gary and Emma. Stephanie had been complaining that she had to invite so many of Ronald's relatives at all. She said Ronald's family was weird and embarrassing. She said she wished they could have had a smaller wedding with just her family and friends. Then Tom heard Stephanie say something that really upset him. She said she was already having doubts about marrying Ronald. She said she wasn't sure she wanted to be part of his complicated family situation. She said maybe she should have waited to get married. Tom was shocked by what he heard. He had thought Stephanie was happy and excited about the wedding. Learning that she was having doubts on her wedding day was devastating for him. But the worst part was what Stephanie said next. She told Lisa that she was planning to change Ronald after they got married. She said she would gradually distance him from his family. She said she would make sure their future children only had close relationships with her side of the family. Stephanie said she had excluded Gary and Emma from the ceremony as a test. She wanted to see if Ronald would choose her over his family. When Ronald went along with it, she knew she could control him. She said I was the only problem because I hadn't fallen in line. Tom was horrified by what he heard. He realized that his sister was planning to manipulate and isolate Ronald. He realized that she didn't love Ronald for who he was but wanted to change him into someone else. That's why Tom's speech was so pointed. He wasn't just defending excluded family members. He was trying to warn everyone about Stephanie's true intentions. He was hoping that someone would realize what kind of person she really was. Jake said Tom's speech had been much more specific than people realized. Tom had talked about how marriage should bring families together, not tear them apart. He had said that people who try to isolate their spouses from their families are dangerous. He had warned that some people use marriage as a way to control others. But most of the wedding guests had been drinking and didn't pick up on the deeper meaning of Tom's words. They just thought he was making a generic comment about the importance of family. Only a few people understood what Tom was really trying to say. After Jake told me all this, I felt sick. I realized that I had been blamed for ruining a wedding that was already doomed. I realized that Stephanie had never loved Ronald the way he deserved to be loved. I realized that Ronald had been manipulated into believing I was the problem. Jake said he had been carrying this secret for months but finally decided to tell me because he felt guilty. He said he had seen how much pain I was in and knew I deserved to know the truth. He said he hoped I would decide what to do with the information. I asked Jake why he hadn't told Ronald what he knew. Jake said he had tried to hint at it but Ronald wasn't ready to hear it. Jake said Ronald was so convinced that I was the villain that he couldn't see what was really happening in his marriage. Jake also told me that Tom had been trying to protect Ronald in other ways. After the wedding, Tom had been watching Stephanie carefully. He had noticed that she was already trying to limit Ronald's contact with family members. She had been making excuses for why they couldn't visit mom or dad. She had been criticizing Ronald for staying in touch with me. Tom had tried to talk to his parents about his concerns but they had brushed him off. They said he was being paranoid and that Stephanie was just adjusting to married life. They said he needed to support his sister instead of looking for problems. But Tom wasn't the only one who had noticed Stephanie's behavior. Jake said several wedding guests had been talking about how strange Stephanie had acted during the engagement period. She had made comments about Ronald's family that made people uncomfortable. Jake told me that Stephanie's college friends had been surprised by her behavior too. They said she had never been controlling or manipulative before. They said she seemed to change after she got engaged to Ronald. One of Stephanie's friends had even pulled her aside during the engagement party and asked if she was sure about getting married. The friend said Stephanie seemed stressed and unhappy. But Stephanie had brushed off the concern and said she was just nervous about the wedding. After learning all this, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call Ronald and tell him everything Jake had told me. But I knew Ronald wouldn't believe me. He would think I was making it up to cause more problems. I decided to call Tom instead. I wanted to hear his side of the story and understand what he had been trying to accomplish with his speech. Tom was surprised to hear from me but agreed to talk. Tom confirmed everything Jake had told me. He said he had been horrified by what he heard Stephanie say before the reception. He said he had never seen that side of his sister before and it scared him. Tom said he had been hoping that his speech would make Stephanie realize how terrible her behavior had been. He said he had been hoping that she would apologize and change her ways. But instead, she had gotten angry and defensive. After the wedding, Tom had tried to have a serious conversation with Stephanie about her treatment of Ronald's family. But Stephanie had accused him of betraying her and ruining her wedding. She had said he had no right to judge her choices. Tom said Stephanie had been avoiding him since the wedding. She had been making excuses for why she couldn't see him. When they did talk, she would change the subject whenever he brought up Ronald or the wedding. Tom also told me that he had been watching Ronald carefully. He said Ronald seemed depressed and isolated. Tom said Ronald had been canceling plans with friends and family. He said Ronald seemed like he was walking on eggshells around Stephanie. Tom said he had tried to reach out to Ronald but Stephanie had been intercepting his calls and messages. She had been making excuses for why Ronald couldn't talk. She had been controlling his communication with everyone. Tom said he was worried that Stephanie was already starting to isolate Ronald like she had planned. He said he didn't know how to help his brother-in-law without making things worse. After talking to Tom, I realized that Ronald was in an abusive relationship. Stephanie was using manipulation and control tactics to isolate him from his support system. She was making him believe that his family was the problem when she was the real issue. I knew I had to do something but I didn't know what. I couldn't force Ronald to see the truth. I couldn't make him leave Stephanie. I couldn't undo the damage that had already been done to our relationship. But I also knew that I couldn't stay silent. Ronald was my brother and despite everything that had happened, I still cared about him. I couldn't let Stephanie destroy his life without at least trying to help. I decided to write Ronald a letter. I didn't want to call him because I knew Stephanie would be listening. I didn't want to visit because she might not let me in. But I could mail him a letter and hope he would read it. In the letter, I explained everything Jake and Tom had told me. I told Ronald about Stephanie's conversation with her maid of honor. I told him about her plans to isolate him from his family. I told him about Tom's real reasons for giving that speech. I also apologized to Ronald for our fight. I said I was sorry that our relationship had been damaged. I said I missed him and wanted to work things out. I said I would always be his brother no matter what had happened between us. But I also told Ronald that I was worried about him. I said I had noticed changes in his behavior since the wedding. I said I was concerned that Stephanie was isolating him from people who cared about him. I mailed the letter 3 days ago. I don't know if Ronald has received it yet. I don't know if he will read it. I don't know if he will believe what I wrote. But at least I tried to warn him. Mom called me yesterday and said Ronald had been acting strange lately. She said he seemed distant and sad. She said Stephanie had been making excuses for why they couldn't visit. Mom said she was worried about Ronald but didn't know how to help him. I told Mom about the letter I had sent but I didn't tell her what was in it. I said I was trying to reach out to Ronald but that I didn't know if he would respond. Mom said she hoped we could work things out. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if Ronald will believe the truth about Stephanie. I don't know if he will be willing to see past the lies she has been telling him. I don't know if our relationship can be repaired. But I know that I did the right thing by trying to warn him. I know that I can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. I know that I can't control what happens next. All I can do is hope that Ronald will open his eyes before it's too late. All I can do is hope that he will realize that his real family has always been there for him. All I can do is hope that love will win in the end. Update 3: It's been 4 months since I sent that letter to Ronald, and I need to update you all on how everything ended. This will be my final post about this situation because I think I'm finally ready to move on. 2 weeks after I mailed the letter, Ronald called me. I was at work when my phone rang and I almost didn't answer because I had gotten used to ignoring calls from family members. But something made me pick up. Ronald sounded different. His voice was quiet and shaky. He said he had received my letter and read it multiple times. He said he needed to ask me some questions and wanted to know if I would meet him somewhere private. We agreed to meet at a park near his apartment. When I got there, Ronald was already sitting on a bench looking terrible. He had lost weight and his clothes were hanging loose on him. His hair was messy and he had stubble like he hadn't been taking care of himself. Ronald told me that after he read my letter, he had started paying attention to Stephanie's behavior. He said he had noticed things that he had been ignoring before. He said my letter had made him realize that he had been making excuses for her actions. Ronald said he had confronted Stephanie about what I wrote in the letter. He asked her if she had really said those things to her maid of honor. He asked her if she had been planning to isolate him from his family. At first, Stephanie denied everything. She said I was lying and trying to break up their marriage. She said I was jealous and vindictive. She said Ronald shouldn't believe anything I told him. But Ronald pressed her for answers. He said he wanted to know the truth about what happened at the wedding. He said he wanted to understand why Tom had given that speech. He said he needed to know if she really loved him or if she was trying to change him. That's when Stephanie broke down and admitted everything. She said she had been having doubts about their marriage from the beginning. She said she had thought she could learn to love his family but realized she couldn't. She said she had been planning to gradually distance him from everyone. Ronald said Stephanie told him she never understood why he cared so much about his stepfamily. She said she thought Gary and Emma were weird and that his relationship with them was unhealthy. She said she had been trying to help him see that biological family was more important. But the worst part was when Stephanie admitted that she had manipulated the wedding guest list on purpose. She said she had wanted to see if Ronald would choose her over his family. She said when he went along with excluding Gary and Emma, she knew she could control him. Stephanie also admitted that she had been intercepting Ronald's phone calls and messages. She said she had been screening his communication with family members. She said she had been making excuses for why they couldn't visit people. Ronald said he felt sick when he realized how much Stephanie had been controlling his life. He said he had been so focused on making her happy that he hadn't noticed how isolated he had become. He said he had lost touch with friends and family without even realizing it. Ronald told Stephanie that he wanted to separate. He said he couldn't stay married to someone who had been lying and manipulating him. He said he needed space to figure out what he wanted. Stephanie begged Ronald to give her another chance. She said she would change and that she would try to accept his family. She said she had been scared and insecure and that's why she had acted the way she did. But Ronald said he couldn't trust her anymore. He said she had shown him who she really was and he couldn't forget it. He said he needed to get away from her and rebuild his life. Ronald moved out of their apartment that week and stayed with a friend. He said Stephanie had been calling and texting him constantly but he had been ignoring her. He said he had contacted a lawyer about getting divorced. Ronald also told me that he had been thinking about our relationship. He said he realized that he had been wrong to blame me for the wedding disaster. He said he understood why I had stood up for Gary and Emma. He said he was sorry for treating me badly. I told Ronald that I forgave him. I said I understood that he had been manipulated and that it wasn't entirely his fault. I said I was glad he had finally seen the truth about Stephanie. But Ronald said something that surprised me. He said he didn't think he could have a relationship with Gary and Emma right away. He said he had been conditioned to see them as outsiders and that it would take time to change his thinking. Ronald said he wanted to work on rebuilding our relationship first. He said he wanted to get to know me again without Stephanie's influence. He said he hoped that eventually he could accept Gary and Emma as part of our family. I told Ronald that I understood but that Gary and Emma were important to me. I said I couldn't have a relationship with him if he was going to continue excluding them. I said they had been nothing but kind to him over the years and deserved better treatment. Ronald said he needed time to work through his feelings. He said Stephanie had convinced him that step relationships weren't real and that it would take time to undo that thinking. He said he wanted to try but couldn't promise anything. Over the next few weeks, Ronald and I started talking more regularly. He told me about the divorce proceedings and how difficult they were. Stephanie was fighting everything and trying to get as much money as possible. She was also spreading lies about Ronald to their mutual friends. Ronald said Stephanie had been telling people that he was mentally unstable and that I had brainwashed him into leaving her. She said the divorce was my fault and that I had always been jealous of their relationship. She was trying to turn everyone against him. But some people weren't buying Stephanie's story. Tom had been telling his family the truth about what happened at the wedding. He had explained about Stephanie's conversation with her maid of honor and her plans to isolate Ronald. Tom's parents were horrified when they learned what their daughter had been doing. They apologized to Ronald and said they had no idea Stephanie was capable of such manipulation. They said they supported his decision to divorce her. Ronald also started reaching out to other family members. He called Mom and apologized for his behavior during the wedding planning. He said he had been wrong to exclude Gary and Emma from the ceremony. He said he was sorry for causing so much pain. Mom was relieved to hear from Ronald. She said she had been worried about him and was glad he was getting away from Stephanie. She said she wanted to help him rebuild his relationships with everyone. But when Ronald called Dad, the conversation didn't go as well. Dad was still angry about the wedding disaster and blamed me for everything that happened. He said Ronald was making a mistake by divorcing Stephanie and that he should try to work things out. Dad said he thought I had poisoned Ronald against his wife. He said I had always been a troublemaker and that I was destroying the family. He said Ronald was being weak by listening to me. Ronald tried to explain what had really happened but Dad wouldn't listen. Dad said Stephanie was a good woman who had been treated unfairly. He said Ronald was throwing away his marriage because of lies I had told him. The conversation ended badly with Dad hanging up on Ronald. Ronald called me afterwards and said he was hurt by Dad's reaction. He said he had hoped Dad would support him but instead he felt attacked. I told Ronald that Dad had always been stubborn and that he would probably come around eventually. But privately I wasn't sure that was true. Dad had always preferred simple explanations and didn't like complicated family dynamics. Ronald also tried to reach out to Gary and Emma but those conversations were awkward. Gary was polite but distant. He said he was glad Ronald was okay but that he had been hurt by being excluded from the wedding. Emma was more direct. She told Ronald that she had been disappointed by his treatment of their family. She said she had always considered him her brother but that he had made it clear he didn't feel the same way. Ronald said he understood why Gary and Emma were upset. He said he wanted to make things right but didn't know how. He said he had a lot of work to do to rebuild those relationships. The divorce was finalized last month. Ronald said it was messy and expensive but he was relieved it was over. Stephanie had tried to drag it out as long as possible but eventually agreed to settle. Ronald moved into a new apartment and started seeing a counselor. He said he needed help understanding how he had been manipulated and how to avoid similar situations in the future. He said he had a lot of work to do on himself. But despite Ronald getting free from Stephanie, our family is still broken. Dad refuses to admit he was wrong about anything. He still blames me for the wedding disaster and thinks Ronald made a mistake by getting divorced. Mom tries to play peacemaker but the tension is obvious at family gatherings. Dad barely speaks to me and makes snide comments when he thinks I can't hear him. He acts like I'm a disease that infected Ronald. Gary and Emma have been supportive of me throughout everything but they're cautious around Ronald. They're willing to give him a chance but they're not ready to forget how he treated them. They said trust has to be earned back slowly. Ronald has been trying to rebuild relationships but progress is slow. He has dinner with Mom regularly and calls me a few times a week. But he hasn't made much effort with Gary and Emma beyond a few awkward conversations. I think Ronald still doesn't fully understand how important Gary and Emma are to me. He sees them as add-ons to our family rather than core members. He's willing to tolerate them but doesn't seem to genuinely value them. Last week, Ronald asked if I wanted to go on a trip with him. He said he wanted to spend some quality time together and rebuild our brotherhood. I told him I would think about it but honestly I'm not sure. Part of me wants to have a good relationship with Ronald again. He's my brother and I love him despite everything that happened. I'm glad he got away from Stephanie and I want him to be happy. But I also know that our relationship will never be the same. Too much has happened and too many things have been said. Ronald chose Stephanie over his family for months and only changed his mind when he realized she was using him. I also can't forget that Ronald was willing to exclude Gary and Emma from his wedding. Even if Stephanie influenced him, he made that choice. He decided that their feelings didn't matter as much as his wife's preferences. And now Ronald wants to rebuild our relationship while still keeping Gary and Emma at arm's length. He wants me to prioritize our biological connection while ignoring the people who have been my family for 20 years. I've decided I'm not going on the trip with Ronald. I told him that I appreciate his efforts but that I can't compartmentalize my relationships. I said Gary and Emma are part of my family and if he can't accept that then we can't be close. Ronald was disappointed but said he understood. He said he would keep working on accepting Gary and Emma but that it would take time. He said he hoped I would be patient with him. I told Ronald that I would always be his brother but that I couldn't wait around for him to decide if my family was good enough for him. I said Gary and Emma had never made me choose between relationships and I wasn't going to accept less from him. Ronald and I still talk occasionally but we're not close. We exchange pleasantries at family gatherings and update each other on major life events. But the deep brotherhood we had as kids is gone and I don't think it's coming back. Some people think I'm being too harsh with Ronald. They say he was manipulated and deserves another chance. They say I should be grateful he got away from Stephanie and focus on rebuilding our relationship. But I learned something important from this whole experience. I learned that family isn't just about blood relations. I learned that the people who show up for you consistently are the ones who really matter. Gary and Emma have been there for me through everything. They supported my education, celebrated my achievements, and comforted me during difficult times. They never made me feel like an outsider or like I had to earn my place in the family. Ronald, on the other hand, was willing to exclude them from one of the most important days of his life. He was willing to hurt people I loved to make his wife happy. He made me choose between loyalty to him and loyalty to them. I chose them and I don't regret it. They're my real family and they always have been. Blood doesn't make family. Love, loyalty, and respect make family. I'm done chasing relationships with people who don't value the same things I do. I'm done trying to fix broken connections that can't be repaired. I'm focusing on the people who have always been there for me. Ronald is welcome to be part of my life if he genuinely accepts Gary and Emma as family. But I'm not holding my breath. People don't usually change their fundamental beliefs about what family means. Dad will probably never speak to me again and that's fine. He chose to blame me instead of understanding what really happened. He chose to support the person who was manipulating his son instead of listening to the truth. Mom is caught in the middle and I feel bad for her. She wants everyone to get along but some things can't be fixed. Some bridges burn down and can't be rebuilt. I'm at peace with how everything turned out. Ronald is free from Stephanie and that's what matters most. The rest of it is just collateral damage from years of dysfunction and poor choices. I have Gary, Emma, Mom, and several cousins who supported me through everything. That's enough family for me. Quality matters more than quantity. This whole experience taught me that standing up for what's right isn't always easy or popular. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you relationships. Sometimes being loyal to good people means losing connection with others. But I would make the same choices again. I would still stand up for Gary and Emma. I would still refuse to apologize for things I didn't do. I would still choose love and loyalty over blood and obligation. Some families are too broken to fix. Some relationships aren't worth saving. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value you. I'm walking away from the drama and focusing on building a good life with people who appreciate me. That's the real happy ending.